Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 2, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 3, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 4, 2, 3.
Okay, test 1, 2, 3, test chairman's mic. Test 1, 2, 3, test. Good. Test 1, 2, 3. Witness Mike. Test 1, 2, 3. Witness 2. Test 1, 2, 3. Witness 3. Testing. Witness 4. Test.
Q&A.
Good afternoon. The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection, and the Committee on Education and Workforce Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development will come to order. The subcommittees are jointly meeting today to receive testimony regarding the public-private solutions to educating a cyber workforce. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Let me begin by welcoming our witness panel and our guests today. Thank you all for taking time away from your important work to testify here and help Congress better understand these workforce issues. I am especially grateful for the opportunity to collaborate today with the members of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Subcommittee to hold this joint hearing on developing our nation's cyber workforce. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Fox and Chairman Guthrie, as well as ranking members Scott and Davis for their collective work on this critical issue. It is an important time for cooperation here on Capitol Hill, and it's my sincere hope that the public will be encouraged that members on both sides of the aisle are focused on the important issues that really matter. Cybersecurity is an issue that affects every sector of our economy and every sector of our society. The risks are broadly shared, and this joint hearing shows the need for an integrated approach to address the challenge of the cyber skills gap. Cyber attacks are growing in frequency and sophistication, but the availability of qualified cybersecurity professionals to deal with these challenges is simply not keeping pace. We cannot speak to the shortage of workers without recognizing the importance of the academic pipeline that produces today's workforce, as well as our next generation of experts who will need to keep pace with the technology and the ever-evolving threats. The dearth of cybersecurity talent is a major resource constraint that impacts our ability to protect information and assets. More than 200,000 cybersecurity jobs in the United States are unfilled, and the demand for positions like the information security professionals is expected to grow by as much as 53% through 2018. This slow-moving crisis is very likely only to get worse. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee recently heard testimony that indicated that the struggle to find qualified personnel to fill these cybersecurity roles in government and business is not only a short-term problem, but is expected to grow and become more acute in the future. Technology innovation and criminal tactics move very fast, and with each new wirelessly connected baby monitor or internet-connected energy-efficient pipeline that comes online, new threats and vulnerabilities emerge to exploit those technologies. Just as the connected world expands and new products improve our quality of life, simplifying many tasks, our vulnerabilities move in parallel and demand a skilled workforce who can protect the functionality and preserve confidential data. Public and private hiring systems must likewise shift and adapt to a new way of thinking about hiring and recruiting. We need intellectual capital that better reflects the qualifications and skills of a new type of cyber worker. For their entire lives, younger Americans entering the workforce have possessed more technology in a single smartphone than some ever imagined. Consider that the iPhone 7 operates at 1.4 gigahertz and can process instructions at a rate of approximately 1.2 instructions every cycle in each of its 2 cores. Put simply, the iPhone 7's clock is 32,600 times faster than the best Apollo-era computers and could perform instructions 120 million times faster. You wouldn't be wrong in saying that an iPhone could be used to guide 120 million Apollo-era spacecraft to the moon all at the same time. The rate of innovation in the information technology sector is truly astonishing. I believe that the federal government and our cybersecurity leaders can create more alliances with community groups, universities, and career and technical schools to better develop our talent pipeline. The Department of Homeland Security supports a number of efforts to strengthen its workforce, from programs to recruit new cyber talent to those that allow the private sector experts the opportunity to share their knowledge with those working at DHS. We need to encourage government, university, employer collaborations that are meaningful and that are robust. Demonstrating cyber know-how no longer comes in discrete forms, such as having a bachelor's degree or not, or obtaining a cyber certification. Cyber competitions, bug bounty programs, and coding camps are all new forms of workforce development. I'm looking forward to discussing with our witnesses today some of the best practices in building public-private partnerships to expand the cyber workforce pipeline. The cyber capabilities of our workforce help support economic strength and sustain our technological advantage. It is my firm belief that America will only remain the world's preeminent superpower so long as it remains the world's cybersecurity leader. Leadership matters, and if we don't encourage and develop the talented women and men who lead this work, we will be both poorer and less safe as a country. The Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, and I would like to thank Chairman Ratcliffe for holding today's joint hearing to explore solutions to educating our cyber workforce. I would also like to thank Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Chairman Guthrie and Ranking Member Davis for participating in today's hearing and sharing your expertise with us. Last month, we held a hearing to discuss the challenge public and private sectors groups encounter as they try to recruit and retain skilled cybersecurity professionals, including federal agencies like DHS. Every expert on the panel seemed to agree that the real problem is demand. The need for cybersecurity talent is accelerating at an impossible rate. We cannot rely on four-year academic institutions and traditional educational frameworks to produce a stream of professionals commensurate with the number of connected devices we now use. What we learned is that before we can recruit and retain, we have to start with a more fundamental question. How can we educate, train, and certify today's students and job applicants to be tomorrow's cybersecurity experts? How do we inject more professionals into the job market? In 2012, Bureau of Labor Statistics projected that by 2020, there would be 400,000 computer scientists available to fill 1.4 million computer science jobs. Recent reports suggest that that deficit is growing instead of shrinking and may reach 1.8 million by 2022. To overcome this shortage, we need a no stone left unturned mentality that allows us to tap into every segment of the applicant pool. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. At our hearing last month, we heard from the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals, or ICMCP, that women and minorities are still vastly underrepresented in cybersecurity, with women making up around 11% and African Americans and Hispanics making up less than 12% of the global cyber workforce combined. What those numbers say to me is that we're still leaving talent on the table. ICMCP's testimony went even further, arguing that in the realm of national security, having a diverse cyber workforce is mission critical. To support this, ICMCP pointed to the 2014 CIA Diversity and Leadership Study, which found that a lack of diversity in CIA's leadership may have contributed to past intelligence failures. We need to be leveraging non-traditional training models like apprenticeships or vocational programs, community colleges, and career development tools. We also need to grow partnerships at the K-12 level to make sure children are being introduced to computers at an early age, even the ones who go to schools that can't afford a specialized tech program. Some of the skills we need to leverage can't be taught in a classroom, and we need to think creatively about how we identify and cultivate traits that lead themselves to cybersecurity. For example, a natural affinity for problem solving or an analytical approach to risk. With the right access and support, these candidates can easily learn the technical skills through on-the-job training, industry certifications, community college courses, and modern vocational programs. As our world grows more and more connected, we also need a multidisciplinary approach to cyber education, one that reaches professionals in the fields like construction, nursing, and electrical engineering. I look forward to hearing ideas from our esteemed panel of witnesses today about how we, as federal policymakers, should be thinking about growing and diversifying our cyber talent pipeline. But ultimately, if we're going to make a dent in the cyber workforce challenge, we need to do more than talk about it. We cannot pretend to be serious about right-sizing the cyber workforce while at the same time entertaining the administration's request for massive cuts to programs like the National Science Foundation's Scholarship for Service. Similarly, I cannot fathom what kind of message is being sent to DACA recipients working to earn tech degrees in fields like cybersecurity, nor can I understand the logic behind needlessly sending this homegrown talent abroad. I'll conclude by saying that defending our networks from cyber attacks requires strong leadership, sustained funding from Congress, and action. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses today and hope we can identify innovative ways to work together to address cybersecurity workforce challenges. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, for any statement that he has.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and welcome to today's joint subcommittee hearing with our colleagues from the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection. I'd like to thank our panel of witnesses and Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, Ranking Member Davis, and the members of both subcommittees for joining today's important discussion on apprenticeships and opportunities for us to grow the nation's workforce. When Americans think of data breaches and cyber attacks, names like Equifax come to mind. This and other recent high-profile data breaches have made private and sensitive information vulnerable to identity theft as well as other cybercrimes. Cybercrimes are constantly appearing in the news, and Americans want to know what is being done to protect their data, as well as other vulnerable targets that compromise our national infrastructure. Organizations in public and private sectors are actively seeking skilled professionals to fill the numerous jobs available in the growing cybersecurity field, and are coming up short in the number of Americans able to fill these essential positions that ensure our American cyber infrastructure is safe. A recent study by the Intel Security and Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS, examined the global cybersecurity workforce shortage and confirmed that the talent shortage was real and widespread. 82% of participation report of a shortage of cybersecurity skills. The same report found that more than 209,000 cybersecurity jobs in the U.S. are unfilled, and job postings are up 74% over the past 5 years. Additionally, the demand for cybersecurity professionals is expected to grow to over 1.8 million by 2022. This skills gap is not unique to the cybersecurity sector. Many other industries, such as manufacturing and transportation, are facing a shortage of skilled workers to fill good-paying jobs. However, when dealing with the cybersecurity, the stakes are even higher because we are dealing with national security. Fortunately, today's hearing continues the discussion in Congress on how to best fill the skills gap. The House unanimously passed Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which allows states to dedicate additional resources towards high-demand fields such as cybersecurity based on changing economic, educational, and national security needs. Additionally, the Committee on Education and Workforce has been carefully observing the implementation of Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that was signed into law in 2014. This law streamlined the confusing maze of workforce development programs and increased the amount of funding available to states to meet specific workforce demands based on conversations with public and private stakeholders in each state. Today's hearing will examine solutions to filling the skills gap that currently exists in the cybersecurity field, and how coalitions across government, academic institutions, and private industries can pave the way to successfully close the skills gap and keep our country's cybersecurity infrastructure safe. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how Congress can assist in the conversations already taking place between the institutions of higher education and public and private entities in the cybersecurity field. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Davis, for her opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our presenters here this morning or this afternoon for this timely and important hearing. And I'm certainly excited to be joining with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Subcommittee as well. So you know, we're holding this hearing today to explore the critical issue of the cybersecurity workforce pipeline. It's an urgent problem that has serious ramifications for our national security. And as my colleagues have pointed out, cybersecurity attacks are on the rise, resulting in massive data breaches and the loss of critical private data as well. We know that cybersecurity vulnerabilities extend to critical infrastructure and even our elections. The need for a more secure cyber infrastructure is only going to grow as technology continues to move into even more aspects of our daily lives. So by tackling this problem, we can create critical infrastructure, and very important component is to also create many more high-paying jobs. The fundamental building block of a strong and durable cyber infrastructure is highly skilled cybersecurity workers. But there's a consensus that we face a critical shortage of cybersecurity professionals, leaving the nation especially vulnerable. So in today's hearing, we will hear from businesses as well as higher education institutions on what is being done, what remains to be done in order to fill our cybersecurity workforce needs. In order to address these problems, we must ensure that we are actively recruiting women, African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans into the field. These groups are woefully underrepresented in the cybersecurity workforce. According to a study, women account for only about 11 to 14% of North America's cybersecurity professionals, so we have to do better. We must not only deepen, but also broaden the pool of highly trained individuals in the field. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Rawls on the many innovative programs that the Northern Virginia Community Colleges has developed to rebuild this robust cybersecurity workforce. And really, in response to a burgeoning need, the college has grown from 50 to 1,500 students in one of its associate's programs in just 4 years. That's really a remarkable change and increase. They're using some very successful proven career development methods like apprenticeships that I think we're all going to be talking about, and career and technical education to bridge the gap. This is the type of innovation that we should promote and support. But I do want to raise a point of concern that the administration is pointing us in the wrong direction. The administration's budget request proposed to cut funding for the CyberCore Scholarship for Service program by a whopping 27% from its FY17 levels. So we want to be looking to expand and not contract our efforts to fill cybersecurity workforce shortages. Surely government, educational institutions, and industry leaders must come together to address the shortage. Government should be adequately investing in the educational and workforce development infrastructure to grow the talent pool and raise awareness for cybersecurity careers. I know that there are innovative ways that the workforce system can use federal investment to build a strong cybersecurity workforce. In my district, in the San Diego Workforce Partnership is using funding from the Obama administration's Tech Hire grants to build cybersecurity training programs. I also believe that educational institutions must be more responsive to the shortages by creating and expanding cybersecurity programs. And I know that we're going to have some great examples here today. Businesses and industry leaders must also do their part, and I look forward to hearing as well from IBM. Industry leaders should be expanding apprenticeship programs, investing in retraining and upskilling their current workforce, as well as recruiting from a more diverse talent pool. It certainly goes without saying that our industry leaders must work collaboratively with educational and training institutions. Businesses must also take a critical look at their hiring practices and really look at their credentialing requirements to ensure that they are not over-specifying credentials that might create a barrier. I want to thank all of our chairs, and I look forward to our witnesses and how we can create a more attractive career pathways in cybersecurity for both the civilian and the military workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentlelady. Other members of the committee are reminded that their own opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are all very pleased to have a very distinguished panel of witnesses before us today. Dr. Stephen Cambone is the Associate Vice Chancellor for the Texas A&M University System. Good to see you again, Dr. Cambone. Mr. Douglas Rapp is the president of Rafori Corporation, DEFCON Cyber, and is testifying on behalf of the Cyber Leadership Alliance. Mr. Rapp, we're glad to have you here as well. Mr. David Jarvis is the security and CIO lead of the IBM Institute for Business Value. Mr. Jarvis, welcome to our committees. And our final witness is Dr. R. Scott Rawls, president of the Northern Virginia Community College. Dr. Rawls, thank you for being here as well. I'd now like to ask the witnesses to stand and raise your right hand so I can swear you in to testify. Do each of you swear or affirm that the testimony which you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that each of the witnesses has answered in the affirmative. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Dr. Cambone for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Guthrie, Mr. Richmond, and Ms. Davis, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I am a relatively newly appointed Associate Vice Chancellor of the university, but I come to this hearing with a long background in the field, having spent a good deal of time in my prior positions dealing with the issues of both the cyber domain, that is operations and activities in the cyber domain, including everything from your wristwatch to robots, and have spent a fair amount of time in the private sector doing the same. A word about Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a land-grant university, and as such, it is very closely fused to the original purpose of the land-grant college, which is to look after the development of the workforce. And the reason I am there is the Vice Chancellor for Engineering for the system is looking to build a coherent program in cybersecurity out of the 11 universities and 3 agencies over which she has considerable influence, because she is as well the Dean of Engineering at the college at A&M and has some 19,000 engineering students from which to cull the cybersecurity workforce of the future. We have, over the past year and a half, been granted 3 designations by NSA and the Department of Homeland Security in cybersecurity. We're quite proud of that fact. And it is in cyber operations, cyber defense education, and cyber defense research. And what does that mean? It means essentially that the auditors came in from both DHS and NSA and said, do you have a teaching program? Do you have students? And do you have faculty who will address the issues that are going to face the country in cybersecurity in the years to come? And the answer was yes, we did, and therefore those designations are in place. We have a minor degree program in cybersecurity for undergraduates, and in the course of the last 2 years, we now have 300 students in that program, and 39 have graduated with bachelor's degrees with a minor in cybersecurity. And in the spring of 18, we will begin a Master's of Engineering in cybersecurity. It is a multidisciplinary degree intended to admit any Bachelor's of Science graduate into the program where they will learn the essentials of cybersecurity in order to bring it back to their career fields in aero, mechanical, civil, whichever engineering field they may have been in. They will have the fundamentals of cybersecurity and be able to bring it to to their businesses. We have worked fairly hard, Mr. Richmond, to make some arrangements with our friends at Blinn College, which is a very large 2-year university in the town next to College Station, and in particular in the field of nursing, where we will work with them to put together a program to test biomedical devices, right, to see that they meet the standards of both the users and the patients. I wanted to offer 2 thoughts in closing on how we might address some of the issues associated with the workforce. One is a bit wonky, I'll admit, and that is that the ISACs, which are functioning better or worse depending on the sector, have a wealth of data and information within them, which we think if we could get some of the research faculty from around the country to engage the material in those ISACs, we might be able to begin to pull out some of the best practices and some of the enduring issues that need to be addressed, and offer then recommendations both to the ISAC leadership and the members, but also into our academic programs as to how we might begin to address those enduring problems. And the second has to do with really picking up on the notion of a land-grant college. The university is a land-grant, sea grant, and space grant college. We think that it's time maybe to think about a cyber grant program and model it on the space and sea grant programs, which are really designed to be consortium based and to be outreach focused in a way to build up the cybersecurity practices of the people in the various regions of the country that they serve. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cambone. The chair now recognizes Mr. Rapp for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Ratliff, Chairman Guthrie, Mr. Richmond, and Mrs. Davis for this opportunity to come here and testify in front of you on this very important topic of public-private partnerships and workforce development. I'm here representing the Cyber Leadership Alliance, which is a 501c6 professional nonprofit organization. It represents about $20 billion worth of Indiana thought leadership in industry. So we have we are dedicated to solving the workforce deficit through public-private partnerships. I'd like to start my testimony by telling a story that really illustrates the perspective from which we come from. And that is, I have my own son, Urban, went to a public school, a great public school in Indiana. And while he was there, he was an average student, and that's much better than I did when I was growing up, so I was okay with that. So he was an average student, and he came out of that high school. And one day I came downstairs, and he was on the computer, and I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, a couple of friends of mine, we've rented some server space, and we've taken a bunch of modules off of Gary's mod, and we've programmed them all together, and right now we're hosting a game for people all around the world." So I asked him, "Well, where in the world did you get interested in something like that? And where did you learn how to do it?" His answer to me was YouTube University. So now that's by far the cheapest university I've paid for to date. The point that I'm trying to illustrate is that when we think about solutions to workforce and how we learn, we need to be creative and disruptive when necessary. We need to look at new concepts such as proposals to use coding as a foreign language requirement in school, for new approaches like the National Minority and Technology Council's concept of resource centers to reach out to underserved communities. We need to think about tying our data from our skill-producing institutions, our higher education, directly to the employers. We do things at Cyber Leadership Alliance, being a 501c6, we've positioned ourselves to be kind of a neutral ground between academia, industry, and government, where we can take subject matter expertise from across different verticals and bring them together to solve these problems where we're less threatened by individual motivations or agendas. We believe that these public-private partnerships have to provide value to their partners. So it's difficult to ask a private industry to take part in something that takes them away from providing value for their shareholders. So we have to be conscious of what they must do to stay in business. We also think that it's important to capitalize on each other's skills and expertise, and that way we can reduce redundancy, we can operate more efficiently, and we can capitalize on the subject matter expertise of the individuals in the partnership. So I look forward to answering any questions that you may have for me today, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Rapp. Chair now recognizes Mr. Jarvis for 5 minutes.
Chairman Guthrie, Chairman Radcliffe, Ranking Member Davis, Ranking Member Richmond, and distinguished members, I am honored to appear before both committees today to discuss the insufficient supply of cybersecurity skills to protect the economic and national security interests of the United States and the global digital infrastructure. I work at IBM as part of the IBM Institute for Business Value, which explores, researches, and reports on emerging business and technology issues, connecting our clients with leading practices. I primarily focus on cybersecurity and the various aspects surrounding the discipline. To understand IBM's approach to skills and talent for cybersecurity, it's important to understand the people behind our security brand. We have roughly 8,000 subject matter experts around the world. Since 2015, IBM Security has hired nearly 2,000 into its security business. We must intelligently manage and struggle for scarce talent daily. Simply put, cybersecurity professionals are not produced by the education system in the United States in the quantities or with the correct hard and soft skills needed. The education system is not aligned to produce a workforce that can defend us from today's cybersecurity threats. There are many estimates as to the size of the skills gap and how long it may take to close. While the size of the gap certainly indicates the severity of the problem, the bigger point is, unless we better align our education system with the core attributes and skills needed in cybersecurity, the nation will continue to be at risk. I would like to start by thanking you for your leadership with the House passing the Perkins Career and Technical Education Act twice. The recent letter signed by 59 senators gives hope the Senate will soon act as well. Thank you again for passing the bill, which IBM believes will help students get the right education for today's jobs. Second, IBM urges Congress to ease the pathway to jobs for new-collar workers. This involves tapping professionals who may not have a traditional college degree, but have the necessary technical skills and aptitudes. To expand new-collar skills, IBM is pursuing and experimenting with a multitude of approaches across the entire supply chain of talent. We are utilizing the new education model, P-TECH. In the United States and other countries, P-TECH connects high school, college, and the world of work for historically disadvantaged populations. P-TECH starts with an employer committing to students that they will be first in line for a job if the school teaches them the core and technical skills needed. The cornerstone for this program is industry partners articulating the skills needed to be taught. IBM Security is currently partnering with programs specifically for cybersecurity in New York and Maryland. IBM seeks out military veterans who are by nature well aligned to cybersecurity positions. We recently announced we will hire 2,000 US veterans over the next 4 years across our business. Veterans are a natural fit for a new collar approach, bringing their skills and talents, but not necessarily formal degrees. IBM is also driving education programs for middle and high schools. Our IBM Cyber Day for Girls events nationwide provide middle school age girls with the opportunity to learn more about cybersecurity careers from female leaders in the field, reaching them at a critical age. We are also partnering with community colleges to build the skills of the future through our Community College Skills Accelerator. With growing numbers of community colleges offering cybersecurity programs, they are an increasingly important source of talent, and they should be sufficiently supported and nurtured. To address the different skill and education needs of new-collar workers, employers need to build a local cybersecurity ecosystem that provides a robust support program for new hires and supports on continuous learning and upskilling. Employers need to participate in regional partnerships with workforce development programs, secondary schools, and technical and vocational schools. Examples of partnerships between employers and educators include joint cybersecurity curriculum committees, externships for local instructors to keep their skills fresh and relevant, the sponsorship of cyber teams, and programs with local and middle high school students to generate interest in the field. The federal government should adopt a new-collar approach to reach and expand its sources of labor. Federal agencies should explore the P-TECH model for workforce development strategies that they can implement. By indicating what it takes to be first in line for a job, they can help address their own cybersecurity workforce needs. IBM believes new-collar workers can be an important component of the nation's overall approach to tackling the cybersecurity skills gap. By not tapping into underutilized sources of talent across the country and supporting and nurturing it, we are doing a disservice to everyone and not securing ourselves as well as we could. Finally, as Congress looks to reform the Higher Education Act, a good starting point is to eliminate existing regulatory obstacles imposed between individuals and cybersecurity careers. For example, work-based learning is a critical source of skills, particularly in cybersecurity. However, the Federal Work-Study Program prohibits more than 25% of funds administered by a college or university from use off campus for relevant internships or other work-based learning with private sector employers. Eliminating the restrictions would increase the flexibility of students and institutions of higher education. Thank you, members of both committees, for the opportunity to present IBM's thoughts, strategies, and activities on improving cybersecurity education and your consideration of this testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. Chair now recognizes Dr. Rawls for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Ratcliffe, Chairman Guthrie, Chairman Richmond, and Davis, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. The road to economic recovery from the Great Recession has run right through the middle of America's community colleges, and as we emerge into a new era of net job growth, community colleges again stand at the forefront in addressing talent and skills gaps. Because we're overrepresented by students from first-generation, low-income, and minority backgrounds, community colleges are uniquely situated to provide a gateway to economic opportunity that must draw, for fields like cybersecurity, that must draw from a wider population to address overall talent gaps. An area where these gaps are keenly felt is the field of cybersecurity, a skill set where jobs are growing 3 times faster than for IT jobs in general, which are growing at a rate much faster than other occupational areas. In the greater Washington region, where my college is located, cybersecurity job postings have grown 74% since 2014, and we've had the most new job postings over the past year, more than twice as many as any region in the country for the past year. Filling this gap, meeting this challenge, and in turn providing a great economic opportunity for our students is our most pressing workforce priority. Consequently, we're not just pursuing a unidimensional strategy, but moving simultaneously down multiple fronts. These include scaling. 4 years ago, as was mentioned, we grew a cybersecurity certificate program into a separate applied associate's degree, growing from an initial 50 students to approximately 1,500 today. We were one of the early certified academic excellence programs with the National Security Agency, and today we share our experience with other colleges as one of 4 national resource centers. Ours is a practical program that emphasizes application, certifications, and participation in meaningful competition. And we're constantly looking for ways to scale to meet our growth challenges by hiring new faculty, pursuing opportunities to endow faculty to overcome the gap between what is top faculty pay and average industry pay, and leasing, purchasing, and renovating multiple facilities. We articulate, which means that we seamlessly connect to 8 senior higher education partners so students can complete a bachelor's degree, which is typically a minimal requirement for cybersecurity employment. At 2 of our 6 campuses, students can complete their bachelor's degree on site, including at our new Regional Workforce Center in Woodbridge, which houses our cyber range and our on-site degree completion program with George Washington University. We aggressively draw from the rich talent pool of transitioning military veterans at our college and in our community. We've partnered closely with Marine Corps University to provide concentrated surge educational opportunities, developed a unique technology boot camp for veterans called Uncommon Coders, articulated military occupational specialty credit into our cyber degree program, and worked with our state legislators to gain the ability to charge lower tuition rates for our active duty military in these programs. We reach into high schools, underserved communities, and untapped populations. We have a team called Systemic that specifically reaches into public schools to provide STEM outreach, including cyber, where we partner with Northrop Grumman, who helps us to fund and support training high school educators who can provide instruction and dual enrollment through our programs. We have a very unique, complementary, and mutually beneficial partnership with the great workforce development agency Year Up, who recruits, develops internship opportunities, financially supports students who are enrolled in our cyber and IT programs. And this year, we've dedicated all of our federal Perkins programs to Perkins funding to draw female students through our cyber and IT programs. Because as you've heard, the cyber workforce population is only 11% female, 12% minority. To meet the skills gap, that has to increase. Now, quickly moving on, we apprentice and aggressively seek out internship opportunities with our cyber students. We do this through Year Up with special employer relationships like we have with the U.S. Senate Sergeant at Arms. Also a special new relationship with Amazon Web Services, where we support and sponsor the first AWS apprenticeship program for the hardest to fill jobs that are out there right now in cloud security. We certify with the assistance of our unique Virginia Fast Forward program, which is the first performance-funded workforce certification program in the nation. It allows us to provide valuable certifications in areas like CompTIA Security Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker at only 1/3 of the actual cost. Cybersecurity job postings typically require certifications more so than IT in general. And finally, key to all this is working very aggressively to learn and seek feedback and react to the information we receive from our valuable employer community, our rich cybersecurity employers in our region. A secret weapon for us is the Northern Virginia Technology Council, which is the largest employer group of its type in the nation. We're very proud to be their first academic partner, and with them sponsored a skills talent assessment for our region just last year. In sum, we're taking a multifaceted approach to address the cybersecurity workforce challenge in our region. And we do so not only because it meets the needs of our employers, but most importantly, it provides such great opportunity for our students. Last year, our college was recognized by the research of Stanford economist Raj Chetty as having one of the highest percentages of students who grew up in the bottom 20% of income, but emerged into the top 20% as adults after attending a college such as ours. We're very fortunate to support a region where the economic opportunities, which include cybersecurity job opportunities, make that possible. And we're also humbled to be an institution that provides that educational ladder to help students of all backgrounds to be able to grasp those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rawls, and thanks again to all of our witnesses today for your testimonies. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Dr. Campbell, I want to start with you. First of all, do you agree with the premise that the cyber skills gap is getting worse? And if so, with so much focus in recent years about expanding cyber educational opportunities, why do you think that's the case?
Yes, the gap is growing. And secondly, in part, the difficulty, I believe, is not just with the number of students we have coming through the system, but the number of qualified faculty to teach, reaching back into high schools and even into grade schools. And so as a way of addressing that, our Cybersecurity Center is actually holding what amounts to boot camps for high school teachers to try to begin to teach them the essentials.
So let's set aside for a second displaced workers and others that can really help build and allow us to develop a cyber workforce and focus on the kind of students that go to Texas A&M or some of the other universities. Is there any type of private sector involvement in setting the cybersecurity courses that Texas A&M offers? Are there specific skill needs that either the private sector or the government is telling you that need to be addressed?
Yes to both. We are fairly tightly coupled with our colleagues over at NSA, who have taken in over 20 students over the last 3 years in direct response to their demand pull, if you will. And on the private side, as an example, we were told 2 semesters ago that we needed to do more secure coding. And for an institution of our size, we turned around a secure coding course in the following spring. So yes, there is a feedback loop. I'll be with our academic advisory committee, which is mostly private sector, Friday afternoon for just this purpose.
So that sort of leads into a question I had for Mr. Rapp. With respect to the Cyber Leadership Alliance, does it play any role, can it play any role in advising, be a matchmaker, if you will, between businesses and schools?
Absolutely. We work very closely with Purdue University and a new program that they have called Career Makers. Right now, we're submitting a proposal with several private companies to actually place a Career Makers program in an underserved community in downtown Indianapolis. The Cyber Leadership Alliance will take that information directly from the employers and play matchmaker with the cohorts of students that are in Purdue and the other universities, such as Ivy Tech and Indiana University. So absolutely, that's primarily our function.
Mr. Jarvis, let me shift to you. IBM, a very large company. How does IBM go about finding and recruiting cyber workers that may not have, say, a traditional educational background, a bachelor's degree, or relevant certifications?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, traditionally, we partner with and work with hundreds of universities around the world to get our talent globally. But, when you look at these kind of these new sources, these, new collar workers as well, this recently we just basically recently announced this earlier in the year. But, we're beginning to work more with community colleges. We recruit at a lot of different, security conferences and organizations, whether it's Women in Cybersecurity or the ICMCP as well that Mr. Richmond talked about before. So, I mean, it's basically with those partnerships kind of building our skills, building our talent pipeline, and with P-Tech as well. I mean, we're trying to address the issue really at all elements of the game, from high school all the way through community college, through veterans programs if we're recruiting at military bases, things like that. Those are all standard things that we typically do, and we're looking to expand to do more as well.
Terrific. So there are a lot of folks going to ask a lot of questions today, but the bottom line, I think, for a lot of us is, exactly how does the government and the private sector best create an environment to incentivize both students, traditional students, and displaced workers to make a career in cybersecurity, and what, as members of Congress, can we do to facilitate that? And very quickly, let me start left to right and give you all a chance to answer.
Well, sir, it's a combination of funding always, but in this case, I don't think it's merely dollars. I think we've really got to extend from the universities backwards into the high schools, and we have to look after the education of the next cohort of educators. So we need to focus as well on students who are going to go on to take their PhDs, so that they in turn can do the teaching we're going to need.
Very quickly, Mr. Rapp, anything you want to add to that?
I just think that we need to reduce some barriers, relook at OPM's requirements for hiring cybersecurity professionals and where they fall on the GS level to increase that, security clearances, and nationality issues.
Terrific. Mr. Jarvis?
Yeah, just in addition to what I said in my testimony, I think those are the primary things. But really, we're looking for just better alignment between the education system and the demands that we have.
Terrific. And finally, Dr. Rawls, give you a quick chance to weigh in on that.
We've benefited greatly from the NSA programs, the CAE programs, also the National Science Foundation, CyberWatch, which is in Montgomery College. Just as we have to scale to meet needs, those programs have to scale as well to meet our needs to be able to provide the training and education that's needed.
Terrific. Chair now recognizes my friend from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
Let me start with Dr. Rawls and Mr. Cambrone. Let me just start with a basic question, because you all deal with students. When they come out, is the private sector or public sector more attractive for them to go to? I would assume it's the private sector.
Yes, sir.
Our students are interested in jobs wherever they are. They also know that when they go into one area, public or private, they're going to have opportunities both ways because of the demand that's out there. So I don't see them really picking and choosing too much in that regard. They're interested in getting their foot in the door.
Well, my experience are the people with the skills in cyber really have a choice where they want to go because of the demand. And government is so rigid. I mean, we still operate with this, traditional office setting type area. And if you go to a lot of the private sector companies that are employing cyber professionals, they have a different workplace and workspace. So the question is, what can we do as government to make government more attractive for people coming out of school? So one idea would be, could we become the industry standard in terms of offering continuing education or other ways for them to boost their skills while working for the federal government? What incentives can we give them to make the federal government more attractive besides money, if you're telling me we're going to have a shortage of in between 1.4 million and 1.8 million?
Right. So the civil service arrangements, as you point out, are Teddy Roosevelt in their origins, and they need to be updated. And among the things that we ought to take a look at is the career progression. These students, the people coming into the workforce, are not going to stay in a job for more than 5 years. And while they're in that job, they need to be given important and interesting things to do. And if there's added the professional training as your education as you're talking, that could be an incentive. But I wouldn't expect them to stay more than 5 years. And then you want to bring back the people who are out 10 years and bring them back at the proper level of the government and not force them back into that civil service arrangement. And then you get the best of both worlds.
Any ideas, Dr. Rawls?
Yes, one is internship opportunities. I think, as I mentioned, we have a unique internship with the U.S. Senate Sergeant at Arms. Scholarship for Service, expanding that program. Right now, that program is limited to four-year students. Community college students can get in through a back door through partnering with four-year institutions, but expanding that, such as the 2017 Cyber Scholarship Act that's been suggested. Another area that is not necessarily private or public, but cuts across both, is the requirements for federal contracting. And so certain things can limit students who are coming out of colleges, whether they're four-year or two-year, particularly for two-year students, into roles because of those either experience requirements that kind of put them in a double-edged sword, that they may not have the years of experience that are required, and so, but they have to be able to get that experience. Or also, many of the federal contracting requirements are very degree-based, require four-year credentials, and are not as skills-based, and so that can limit students who may be coming out of a community college, looking at a foothold in a job role, and then going back and getting their bachelor's degree. So looking at contracting requirements is another area to pay attention to.
Dr. Jarvis, Ms. Jarvis, very quickly, what are the challenges associated with setting aside the conventional wisdom that degrees equal skills and integrating these strategies into workforce development plans?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I mean, I think there is a transition that needs to happen, and I think that's what we at IBM have been advocating for here in the past year, is really trying to shine a light on the issue, to look past degrees and to look at skills to help us with our most challenging and pressing information technology skills gaps, not only in cybersecurity in particular. And I do think it is a bit of a culture change, and I do think it will take a little bit of time, but that's why we're trying to advocate for our clients and for others in the field that are suffering from the same gaps, to expand the aperture and tend to look at new sources of talent.
And very quickly, Dr. Rawls, what can we do to increase the number of minorities and women and African Americans in the cyber space?
Well, I think all of us, and that includes what we're doing at our community college, we have to be very aggressive in our approaches to pull students through. I mean, in areas like computer programming and cybersecurity, we do not see as many female students, and they don't see as many female students in the workforce. So that's where we have to work closely with our public schools. We have to change our marketing materials. We have to have different forms of outreach in that regard. We also have to have role models in our programs, so that we have to make sure that we are recruiting and aggressive about recruiting female and minority teachers. The leader of our cybersecurity program is female, and I do think that makes a difference as well. So I think we each have to be aggressive in our own ways to make sure that students, regardless of gender or regardless of background, know that the opportunities are there, but also know that the ladder is there to be able to get there. That's why I think community colleges are so important in this role, to help provide a front end for that ladder to those opportunities, which many students may not think is possible for them.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, Mr. Guthrie.
Thanks. It's interesting what Mr. Jarvis just said. The ranking member, Ms. Davis, and I have been looking at programs that don't necessarily, education systems that allow people to have careers that don't necessarily have to require degrees if the skills needed don't require degrees. And I think it would be very helpful, even not just people in high school moving forward, but also people trying to get relocated, understanding there's a skills gap. They're in maybe even have a degree, but not in the right program, not in the right degree to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there, and then being able to plug back into something we really want to look at. And Mr. Rapp, I was just kind of, as I was preparing for this hearing, my son did information technology, computer science, and so forth. What are the skills there? And there's a shortage there, too. And as a dad, that worked out because he was able to get a good job, but it's not good for the country, so we got to fill that in. And so I guess the question is, what's the difference between somebody in information technology, the skills, and cybersecurity? I know they overlap, but what is kind of distinct differences?
They do, and in conversations with the CISOs that represent our membership, the foundation for both tend to root itself in that analytical side and the coding side also. The biggest skills that our members look for, that our membership looks for, is the problem solving and the critical thinking skills. What our CISOs say is that they can teach somebody the environment that they're working in. Certainly a foundation in risk and risk mitigation, but what's mostly lacking as a skill set from the students that are being produced today is that critical thinking and problem solving ability.
So you can teach someone to code. The question is, can you teach someone to figure out how somebody's going to undo their code or try to get into their code and think through that? That's a good way to put it. So, Dr. Cambone, last week the Education Department urged schools and colleges to strengthen their cybersecurity measures in response to online attacks in which cyber criminals have sought to extort money from educational institutions on the threat of releasing sensitive data from student records. These records contain sensitive information and must be protected with the strongest security. What additional steps do you think institutions with cybersecurity programs can take to ensure they are developing a robust cybersecurity workforce that can help prevent these types of intrusions?
Well, first, we need to make sure that that which we teach, we actually do. Right. So it's not enough to teach these things; we have to do them. And I'm happy to say that I have had, over the last 3 weeks, a number of conversations with the university system level CISOs, as well as the folks at the A&M level, and they are quite attentive to the need. So they're doing the things that you would expect them to do.
So what would be some of examples of things that they're?
Well, we have moved past merely watching the firewalls, and we're now very attentive, for example, not just to the presence of odd email in the system, but we've actually now capable of putting out the alerts very quickly on the phishing attacks that one gets. I just had one today, as a matter of fact. Describing in detail precisely what that attack looks like, what you're supposed to do in response, and the like. So there's a very active set of measures in place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And Mr. Jarvis, in your testimony, and when you wrote and then you discussed that the fact that the House has passed the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, what we commonly call here the Perkins Act, the bill is now awaiting Senate action. If Perkins CTE is reauthorized, how do you think it will help employers more effectively address their cybersecurity workforce needs?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, simply put, education needs to produce the people that we need to hire, and I think we believe that in passing CTE, that's gonna build the pipeline for us in the long term, and it's gonna support that pipeline in the long term for us, because we just can't look at it in terms of it's just not a point problem, right? We need to do this for many years, and I think that it's gonna keep and expand the pool of applicants and the pool of experts that we need.
I think you're right. As we were been really looking at this with Ranking Member Davis and I, and discussing a lot of it is a generation ago, back when I was in high school, a generation ago, almost 30-something years ago, we really got away from technical and pushing training, and we're paying for it now, and that's and so we can't just take a short-term view, which we absolutely need. Yep. We also need to take a long-term view about what's good for the overall system, and so a generation from now, we're not saying, boy, we should have done more. So that's important.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, and my time's about to expire, but I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, Ms. Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to relate to the comments of my colleague, Mr. Guthrie, because I think if we could open our minds and our hearts in many ways on this issue of how do you create better pathways for young people, not necessarily relying on a more traditional college track, and doing something, I think in Switzerland they call it permeable, so that you have young people moving from certification into the colleges and back, and certification. I think there's a different route that's possible out there, and that's also attributable to the issue that I think we're dealing with right now. How do you create that better for young people so they aspire to those areas, but there's also a lot of prestige in their moving forward so that you get a lot more community acceptance, and I think it all sort of fits together. Dr. Rawls, I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the NOVA program for a second, because I think you were able to do some work, particularly in helping to transition veterans and students more seamlessly into the job market there. What are there some surprises in trying to do that, and how do you see being able to scale more of those efforts as you look at other programs connected so strongly to the community college system?
Well, but I'll start first with high schools and with working with the high schools. So one of the things that many people do not realize is one of the fastest growing areas of community college enrollment is dual enrollment with high school students. So essentially, when Mr. Jarvis was talking about P-TECH, that's a dual enrollment strategy. And so what we have to do a better job of is taking our pathways into programs into high schools. And so one of the challenges for us is that as challenging as it is for us to employ cybersecurity professionals at the community college level, you can imagine at the high school level. And so what we really have to do, and I think this is important around how we collaborate through Perkins funding and other things, is to make sure our pathways connect with each other so that students can start in high school and finish and move through community colleges and move on through universities. I think paying attention to that is very important. We pay very, very close attention to our veterans population because we see that as such a rich resource for the cybersecurity workforce in our region. We have over 7,000 veterans at our college, one of the largest populations of veterans in the United States. They bring with, well, you know, all the marvelous attributes. We then, similarly with public schools, we're working to reach into particularly our partners with the Marine Corps, working with military before they transition out. First, making sure that they articulate, because they pick up technical skills along the way in terms of military occupational specialties, being very aggressive about that, being very nimble about how we provide education to them over very concentrated short periods of time, what we call surge programs, and then making sure that the education they're receiving in the military transitions through us as well. So again, it's as much about not just waiting for students to come to us, but to reach into those valuable pools to make sure students are starting along a valuable pathway as they move forward.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, because in some ways, I think what you're suggesting is there may be opportunities. It may be for someone who's been trained in a number of the industries within the military to shorten their training period when it comes to cybersecurity. You're talking about months, not years, and maybe there are other programs that have done something similar. If I may, just Mr. Jarvis, going to you quickly, because I know that one of the needs you have in finding trained personnel is sometimes going to other countries where you have an easier time doing that. Is it fair to say that if we don't answer the need with our own students, that a number of companies will continue to do as you have to do today, to look elsewhere?
I'm not really, expert on that particular area for IBM, but I mean, we're going to look for the talent where we need to find the talent, and we want to develop it wherever we can. And we have a global business, so we're obviously looking, all across the globe for that talent wherever it may be.
Yeah. Well, we want to make sure that companies like IBM find those resources in our own country. Yeah. One or two. Well, I think my time is up, Mr. Chairman. So perhaps. I know I'm going to hear everybody else asking the same questions. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the full Committee of Education and Workforce, the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox.
Thank you very much. I do have some questions, but I have to first make a comment about Mr. Rapp's talking about the fact that we need people who have problem-solving and critical thinking skills, and say to all of my colleagues and all of the panelists, if we continue to use that T word, which I hate so much, you are not going to encourage critical thinking. And so I want to ask you all, Dr. Rawls, to take it out of your vocabulary, and all of us. Honestly, there's no better example of what I'm talking about than his just saying that. You remember, you tea animals and you educate people. So if you want critical thinking, you got to be in the education business. Mr. Rapp, I'll come back to you. Indiana included the Skill Up grant program in the Combined State Workforce Development Plan the state developed to implement the changes passed as part of WIOA. In your experience, how has the Skill Up program been integrated with Indiana's broader workforce development efforts?
Indiana's done an outstanding job working particularly with the Department of Workforce Development under the last commissioner, Stephen Braun, who spent a lot of time taking taking data and ensuring that the data was correct so it accurately reflected what the needs were of the state. In accordance with what he found through that, they have the Skill Up program now is driven by the demand of the employers as that data was collected directly from the employers. So that goes to my point earlier that in public-private partnerships, we have to get as close to the source of data as possible to make it accurate. And then we must tailor with the resources that we have currently. We must tailor those limited resources to the demand so that we can have the best effectiveness of those programs.
So would you say a little bit more about how you're measuring the success?
Right now, the success that we measure is literally by both the unemployment rate, specifically for cybersecurity. We do rely heavily on a public-private partnership from NICE, CompTIA, and Fireglass, I believe, the CyberSeek program. And what that program does is it surveys all the states for the job listings and then the number of jobs that are filled. So that's fairly accurate data. So that's how we're able to measure that, particularly within that area. And I will say with 32 universities in Indiana that offer cybersecurity curriculum, with seven different centers of excellence, DHS, NSA, and 6 R1 through R3 research institutions. We're very proud of all of those things, but we're still not yet gaining ground.
Mr. Jarvis, I'm a strong advocate for earn and learn programs that provide students and job seekers the opportunity to learn on the job. Nobody knows better than employers what skills are needed to succeed in a particular career. So what suggestions do you have to better align our academic programs with potential on-the-job learning opportunities?
Certainly, certainly. I think that one of the things that we look for in terms of learning, when we were talking about critical thinking a little bit earlier, is we look across the board, especially in cybersecurity, to make sure that our candidates are explorers, they are consultants, they are students, they're guardians, and they're also problem solvers. And I think those are all things that can come through earn and learn. And whether it's through the P-TECH model, where we have students basically guaranteed internships as part of their education program, so they are both learning and earning and learning some more as part of the process, or if it's through internships or apprenticeships or other programs that we have, we think those are all important and are part of the solution.
Well, thank you all very much. In my clips today, I haven't had a chance to read it. There's an article that says U.S. needs to move past its fixation on the bachelor's degree, study says. It's an Education Week by Catherine Gerwert. I'm going to get a copy of it and see, because I know this is an issue that's come up several times here this morning. Thank you all very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the Chairwoman. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full Committee on Education and Workforce, Mr. Scott, the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Cambone, you went to great lengths to say how you fashion your curriculum to address the needs of the industry. Is there value in making sure that what's in your curriculum in Texas is the same that's in the curriculum in Virginia, so that people who present with a cybersecurity degree will be presenting the same credentials?
It's an interesting question. My instincts say yes, but my respect for the academic integrity of the various institutions leads me to think and to expect that there will be some differences. And that's not bad. And so what we have, one of our members is very active in a national curriculum consortium. And what they do is share both best practices and where the leading edge of education is going, to answer in part what you're suggesting, which is there needs to be some conforming of the knowledge that's being imparted.
Well, who would put together the standard?
You know, I think that's best left to the educators. And I think that,
I
as
mean,
I say,
a consortium,
Yes.
as you have suggested, so that you'd have some kind of independent
I think that
judge?
would be very helpful. And if we did the cyber grant arrangement, that would be a mechanism for doing that kind of conforming.
Thank you. Mr. Jarvis, last year, the EEOC issued a report on diversity in the tech industry, and the findings were that racial discrimination and ethnic discrimination was widespread in the tech industry, such that if they stopped discriminating, there would not be a shortage of workers in the tech industry. Is the cybersecurity part of the tech industry plagued with that problem?
I don't know specifically in terms of, I mean, I couldn't speak to specifics in terms of the problem. I mean, I do think we need to do a lot more outreach. I do think we need to do a lot more recruitment, and I do think that IBM, does a fairly good job at reaching out to underserved groups traditionally and reaching for that. And I think for cybersecurity, it's just as important. Talking about some of the professional organizations that are out there that we recruit at, I think that's one thing that can be done, but I think there's other things as well.
I understand that there's a net downsizing at IBM, yet you still import thousands of H-1B guest workers. Can you explain the apparent discrepancy?
That's not really my area of expertise, but we could probably get more information for you if you need it.
Okay, that'd be good. Dr. Rawls, can you tell us what barriers there are to apprenticeship and internships in the cybersecurity area?
Well, to have internship and apprenticeships, you have to have a strong commitment from the employer community. Many employers do step up. That's one of the great things for us is our partnership with Year Up, which is managed, I think, across the country, is doing a remarkable job in cultivating internships for deserving young people that are moving into IT and cyber and finance areas. And so that's been a great partnership for us, working with companies like Amazon now that is sponsoring its first apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is new to IT, and so I think it's evolving in that regard. It does take a great deal of employer commitment. One of the things with our apprenticeship programs, for instance, if you look at our apprenticeship with Amazon Web Services, which is focused around cloud security, that's primarily based around certifications. It's a 16-week program where we provide the related training. So it's Security Plus, Linux Plus they get the AWS Architect certification. One of the things that Congress can do is look at the opening up the notion of what certifications mean in the workplace as a workplace credential. Areas like Pell Grants for short-term certifications that are meaningful and have rigor, I think can open up more opportunities for apprenticeship opportunities and for those kinds of certification programs that we find are important with apprenticeship.
Are you able to leverage the WIOA and CTE funds for those programs?
We are, for those students who are eligible. So with, for instance, our AWS apprenticeship program, some of those students are able to be supported through WIOA because they qualify. A few are also supported through a group called Apprente, which is, I think, supported through apprenticeship funding. And then we also support some ourselves. So looking at how those opportunities are available, certainly they are all employees of the company, and they will move into new career ladders or new job payment ladders as a result of their involvement in apprenticeship. So I do think apprenticeship is something that there's many ways to open up the doors much more than we have those opportunities. And IT and cyber, I think, are rich for that because of the connections with particularly certification opportunities that can tie into some of these program areas.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you. Gentlemen and panel, thank you for bringing your experience and expertise. I want to start with Mr. Rapp. I'm proud of two institutions of learning I have. I've a number of them in the district, but in terms of cybersecurity, Penn State and also in the northwestern part of the district, Mercyhurst, we've got the Tom Ridge School of Cybersecurity there in Erie County. Mr. Rapp, the degrees required for many cybersecurity programs are only 2 years in length. What advantage does a 2-year cybersecurity credential offer over 4-year plus program? And plus, any thoughts on, I don't, for lack of a better word, micro degrees, less than 2-year type certification programs?
That's a great question. What we found is there's different skills that are required for different functionalities in cybersecurity. Not every single person in cybersecurity needs to have a 4-year degree. That's true. So the rise of applied 2-year cybersecurity degrees have been directed towards a gap of applied entry-level cybersecurity jobs that are out there. Certifications are useful for, again, specific types of jobs. So I think there's a need across the spectrum for all of these degrees, and none of them should be discounted. I also believe that even beyond these degrees and certification, when we look at what NICE has done to describe what skills are necessary to take part in workforce development in cybersecurity, that we shouldn't discount aptitude testing outside of degrees.
Well, thank you. Mr. Cambone, I understand Texas A&M believes workforce development to be a core component of the institution mission. How does this affect the education experience you provide to your students?
Well, sir, a very large fraction, and maybe my colleagues behind me can remind me, but a very large fraction of our incoming freshmen are first-time university students. And so the focus is on retention of those students, bringing them all the way through to their graduation, because it's not helpful to start and not finish. So you begin there. And then we've talked about the apprenticeship programs, we talked about the internships, we've talked about the Hack for Defense programs. All of those kinds of things are intimately connected with their development. And in the engineering school, they have to, at the end, participate in what amounts to a capstone project, where a number of them have to get together and figure out how to produce an outcome. So all of that is part of the development of the student as a productive member of society and a member of the workforce. With respect to the cyber business in particular, there are any number of, and I can give you a list of the extracurriculars that are in place, that the students, while they're not required to engage, find themselves wanting to engage, because it does indeed bring them an experience that they're not going to get just in the classroom. So it gives them the opportunity to apply what they've learned as they go forward. So all of that, you roll all that up and you do some of the placement work that's necessary then for those students to find jobs when they're finished. And that's how you take someone who's first-time university and their families to a position in the workforce.
Thank you. Dr. Rawls, from your written testimony, I saw cybersecurity job posting growth 74% since 2014. That's amazing. And that the Northern Virginia area, 2 times as likely, given job opportunities here for position openings. Is your program currently at capacity and for enrollment? And what specific strategies do you use for recruitment?
Well, we're not at capacity, but we do struggle primarily to make sure that we can acquire the instructors that we need. We're moving down multiple strategies in terms of facilities. We also have to make sure that we can look for strategies to pay our instructors higher rates so that we can keep them. One of the things, having the highest concentration of cybersecurity jobs in the country, which also means we have the highest concentration of valuable adjunct faculty in our region. And so we tap into that very aggressively. But we also share, we work very closely with all our partners around the country. I think that's the value of, for instance, like the NSA CAE programs. Austin Community College was with us yesterday. We work with the other 22 community colleges in our state in terms of acquiring that CAE designation. And we also provide much of the instruction online. We operate the shared services backbone for the online instruction in our state. So many students are at other parts of our state in rural Southwest Virginia and taking cybersecurity programs through their institutions, but acquiring some of the classwork through us online because we have the valuable instructional resource in our region. We just have to look for strategies to get those resources out broadly into areas where they may not actually naturally exist.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both subcommittees for holding this hearing and to all the witnesses that are here. Listening to the sort of to-do list in terms of where Congress can help, I was struck by the fact that as someone who sits on the Armed Services Committee, the last defense authorization bill that was just signed in December by President Obama actually raised the cyber command to parity with the full other combatant commands, which is saying something, in terms of the fact that, we've got to sort of be more agile in terms of, how we think about this issue and address it. And again, the nice thing about this hearing is that, again, we're talking about pathways other than just four-year degrees. Dr. Rawls, you talked about the Amazon Apprenticeship Program. I mean, Amazon is almost as big as the Pentagon, it seems like these days. So, I mean, they obviously have a lot more capability in terms of taking on an apprenticeship program with a workforce of tens of thousands of people. The challenge that I'm hearing out there for a lot of smaller firms who are in, whether it's, a small community bank that's terrified about cyber attacks, or small defense suppliers that are as much a backdoor to cyber attacks as the large OEMs, is just that, they don't think in terms of, their human resources or apprenticeship sort of models, and how we can sort of get them engaged, I guess is, the question I was going to ask. I mean, it sounds like a really impressive program that you have with Amazon, but I mean, have you been able to sort of break through to smaller employers in terms of getting them engaged in apprenticeships?
Well, first, I think it's important to keep in mind, the Amazon program is a cloud security program. In fact, you have to thread a pretty good needle to get into, for instance, the veterans program. You already have to have a bachelor's degree, a Network Plus certification, and be a veteran. So it's, you're going to a certain place. But one thing I think it's important to keep in mind with cybersecurity is it is broad. Cybersecurity is broad. So I think all institutions are having to take a cyber mentality. And so even though students coming out may not, for instance, we graduate more information technology associate degree graduates of any community college in the country. IT graduates, networking students who are going in have a cyber mentality. And that's also a foothold for them to move up and actually gain the credentials to be technically cybersecurity. I think there are other places too that community colleges, if I may, are naturally inclined to help. A lot of times we think about attacks that are only coming through computers, but there are more network devices now than there are people in the world. And so technicians, facility maintenance have to take on new mentalities around cybersecurity. There's an OT side to cybersecurity. So for instance, we're working on programs that when I was in North Carolina we developed, and here we're working. We have, for instance, the largest data center workforce and employment in the country. Well, a technician today has to be able to know, is something a maintenance failure, or is your HVAC system being hacked? Is your PLCs being hacked? So I think cyber is really much broader than the narrow term of specific IT cybersecurity programs. And we have to make sure we make the linkages between that in terms of that breadth.
Right. But I guess my point, in terms of trying to get employers to think about apprenticeships, just as a model.
Apprenticeship.
Yeah, it's just, so to bring it back to Congress, there's a Department of Labor apprenticeship grant program, which President Trump's budget actually called for funding at last year's level. It was eliminated in the House appropriations bill. The Senate actually fully funded it. And so those funds in Connecticut, I can just tell you, have been a really good enticement to get companies that never really sort of thought about getting involved in apprenticeships to actually do it, to make that jump into doing it. And I guess that's the question, is how do we entice small guys to get into the business of apprenticeships?
Yeah, apprenticeship's not easy. Apprenticeship takes a great commitment. I worked with Siemens and Bosch, and I know how much investment they put in per student. And so IT is moving more that direction, I think primarily because of the gaps they see. I think IT is naturally inclined that way, but I do think we do have to do more than just talk about apprenticeship. We have to have meaningful programs for apprenticeship. I think we also have to look broadly at being very aggressive around just meaningful work-based learning. Sometimes we have programs that aren't formal apprenticeship, but they're very much important because of that work-based learning. Because for many students coming out of our colleges and universities now, many of them, unlike when I was a student, they didn't work in high school. They didn't have some of those opportunities. So apprenticeship becomes even more important, I believe, for today's students, apprenticeship and meaningful work-based learning than it's ever had before. So I do think that is a very important area for us to collectively pay attention to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Smucker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rawls, two aspects of two things you mentioned in your testimony I'd like to follow up on. You had mentioned Year Up, and I'd be interested in understanding, wonder if you could elaborate a little more on the partnership that you have with Year Up. Do Year Up recruits attend class at your school, or are they recruited from the school? If you just elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, Europe is a national workforce development organization, started in the Northeast. A model has emerged. Our college has been a lead in working with Europe because of such a complementary relationship. Essentially what Europe does is it provides a one-year experience for students, and it's where they gain professional workplace skills through supplemental instruction. They have meaningful internships. They receive financial support. And what we provide is the technical instruction through our education programs through the community college. Perhaps maybe I could give you an example, though, because I'll tell you of a student example which I think explains why it's such a natural fit with community colleges. One of our students is a great student named Darwin, who last year was served on our community college board as the student representative. Darwin grew up in foster youth homes, 4 foster youth homes. He came to our college in high school through our outreach programs into high school, found out about Year Up and became involved in the Year Up program. So his experience last semester, he was describing it to me recently. He worked 5 days a week in an internship with Freddie Mac. He would take special supplemental classes that help him in terms of making sure he has the critical thinking, the workplace skills that add to the value. He took 2 cyber classes with us at night at our Reston Center, and then he took 2 classes online. And then on Saturdays, he would go to our Woodbridge campus and work in a program that we have called, not work, we have many students that come and meet with our instructors on Saturdays to do competitions and other types of things called Cyber All. And so Darwin's an example of the kind of individual that without the doors that can reach out through programs like our community colleges, like Year Up, it's an example of how you can go from the bottom 20% to the top 20% as long as you've got that ladder and that work opportunity to get there. And Year Up is key to us as a complementary partner in that regard.
Yeah, it sounds like a great program. I'd like to follow up as well on the discussion on apprenticeships, and I'll go to Dr. Cambone and potentially come back to you, Dr. Rawls, if we have time. But very interested in apprenticeship programs as well. One of the models that I've seen is a partnership with a college, a community college or another institution where there is an ability for an apprentice to both work on a job site and get a degree, whether it's an associate degree or even a bachelor's. I guess that's my question to you. Are you doing that? Is there a possibility of apprentices earning a bachelor's degree at the same time that they would earn a certificate, some sort of work certificate as well?
I'm not precisely sure of whether that particular thing can be done, but this is what I do know. I mentioned earlier that A&M has a very close relationship with Blinn College. Blinn College is a very large 2-year institution in the next city. And we have a relationship with them that does take their students through apprenticeship programs, through the accreditation in the 2-year school, matriculate into A&M, and get your degree. So there is a ladder, as was described here, that can allow students to do that. Not all students want to do it, right? So they're happy to take the off-ramps,
right,
and pursue their lives in the way that they would like. But that ladder has been built.
Yep. Dr. Rawls, would you like to respond to that as well?
I think the important thing for apprenticeship is that we have to make sure we structure it into our programs. And so when students go through related training, that means that we have to make sure, for instance, if we're offering certifications through related training, that we also structure so that we can give that credit as it comes through. So I think more and more what we have to collectively have to do as educators is not look for the either ors, but to make sure that those types of experiences, apprenticeship, particularly if it leads to certification and how we can give credit, military in terms of military occupational specialty, I think there aren't, I think we get used to the either ors. Many of the students who come to us as a community college already have four-year degrees. And so they're looking to get specific skill sets on top of their four-year degrees that allow them to enter into the workplace. And so one of the things that is incumbent on educators is to make sure that we can structure our programs such that students can gain skills through things like apprenticeship, but make sure that they stack, if you will, or become a part of a program so that they can keep moving forward. And I think that's very important in how we think about our educational curriculum structures.
Very much agree. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the chairs and ranking members of both subcommittees for coming together to convene this hearing today, and thank you for your testimony, gentlemen. Dr. Rawls, in your testimony, you mentioned the great work of NOVA to fill the shortage of talent in the cybersecurity workforce, and you mentioned efforts to reach into underserved and untapped populations, speaking specifically of your campaign to encourage women to explore careers. So have you explored ways to accomplish the same success with minority candidates?
Well, I may sound like I'm repeating myself, but I do think Year Up is a key factor for us in that regard. So if you look at the Year Up student population, it is primarily minority. And so students from as we refer to as opportunity youth through Year Up. And so I think that's a key strategy for us because it's particularly focused on IT careers, also finance careers. And so that's an example. For us, NOVA is a majority minority institution. Diversity is kind of in our core, it's in our being. So the chances are for most of our students, they are going to be from minority backgrounds. Where we have struggled is not having as many, is not so much around minority students coming through our programs, but is in terms of female students. And so that's why we have this year very deliberate outreach strategies with respect to female students. But certainly, I think our Year Up partnership is a key in terms of our reaching more minority students, both male and female. And for us at NOVA, that's a natural for us in terms of who we are.
Okay, you say that NOVA has 9 university partners where students can complete their degrees. Do you have any figures on how many of your graduates have transitioned to minority-serving institutions?
Mm-hmm. I would have to get those to you in terms of HBCUs. I can't tell you specifically right now. I do know we're working right now on a partnership among universities and community colleges, actually with our veterans population, and one of the partners is Norfolk State, who has been a close partner in terms of working with one of our largest partners, which is George Mason University. So there's a collaborative of which Norfolk State is involved in that regard. So we certainly have had many students who have gone to HBCU programs, and there are some cyber programs out there as well that would allow them to move forward to HBCUs.
Thank you. One of the ways to, I think, fix a lack of diversity in this industry is to encourage women and minorities to become entrepreneurs. Does NOVA have any special programs that encourage entrepreneurship?
Well, yes, we do. In fact, at our Alexandria campus, we have a very unique program that's really, I have to give credit to our students and some really unique faculty there. They call themselves the Startup Club. And they actually, they are technology tinkerers, and they meet with faculty in a small little, I think it was probably a closet at one time, but they have multiple different tools there that they use. And last year, we sent them off to Cornell, and they came home with a second place cybersecurity competition award. So we don't have as many resources around entrepreneurship, so we're partnering very closely right now with George Mason University around all aspects of tight connections. And one of the areas that we're working and talking with them about is how we tap into their entrepreneurship programs. One of the things that we don't always have to do is to recreate the wheel when we can look for valuable partners. And I do think our university partners provide us a lot of opportunity to partner to bring opportunities to community college students that they typically don't naturally have that you would find in terms of entrepreneurship programs that you see at universities.
Thank you. Quickly, Mr. Jarvis, do you have any figures on how successful your efforts have been in retaining female talent, and how many women cybersecurity professionals are at IBM remain after 3 years on the job?
Sure. I don't have the demographics in front of me at the moment, but I mean, what I can do say is, we do push very hard, and in fact, the last 3 chief information security officers at IBM have been women. And I think what's important is they provide being role models and mentors. We also have a very strong support network or professional organization within the company called Women in Security Excelling. That is a professional development and support organization for women in our cybersecurity group, providing role models, and they do host those Cyber Day for Girls programs as well. So I think being able to have those professional support mechanisms once we get the talent helps us retain the talent.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. You're back.
Thank the gentlelady. Chair now recognizes my friend, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to be with you today. I'm very interested in this education process. In fact, in the 12th Congressional District of Georgia, we are moving the U.S. Army Cyber Command, and it's moving to Fort Gordon, and it's been a lot of noise as far as my hometown in the district, which is going to create about 12,000 cyber jobs in that district. Our area has come together to embrace this opportunity. Public-private solutions have been critical to the success of the Army Cyber Command's relocation, and I'm proud of my community coming together to forge a path for success. I'm going to highlight 2 examples. Augusta University created a cyber institute to educate a local cyber workforce, and our Governor Deal has just committed $50 million for a Georgia Cyber Innovation and Training Center dedicated to public-private partnerships and a cyber workforce. We also have the Technical Tinkerers Club, and I have a robot on my desk that some elementary school children coded and built, and they didn't even know they did it. If you'd have asked them to code something, they probably would have said, or if you'd ask a middle schooler or a high schooler, we need you to code this, I said, well, I can't do that. But these young people really embrace this to the extent that what I found in serving on the Education and Workforce Committee, one is there's a huge disconnect between the business community and the education community. Secondly is that, for example, in Dublin, Georgia, we have an inner-city school system that went to 2 charter elementary schools. One is on leadership, that's teaching Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. The other one is a STEM school. And we now have a 96% graduation rate in an inner-city school system. This career tech a career direction idea is extremely important. We also know that if you're not reading at the 3rd grade level, when you get to the 4th grade, you're not going to graduate. And for some reason, when they get to middle school, we lose them. I mean, middle school, the teachers say it's just a real issue here with keeping focus on education. So, with those challenges, we're talking about college, we're talking about high school. I'm not sure we don't need to go back to the elementary school and really try to help these young people understand exactly why they're getting an education. Because I ask them what their dreams are every time I go, and they have great dreams. They just don't know what they're doing there. So I'd just like to go down the entire panel there and just get your ideas on, do we need to kind of get thinking out of the box here and figure out what in the heck's wrong, because the United States is not where we need to be as far as education, and we are losing a lot of young people. They're not focused, they don't know where they want to go, so. Mr.
Yes,
Lamont.
sir. Well, I'm happy to say that I was just in Augusta, not 10 days ago.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Talking with Dr. Sexton. She's got a terrific crew of people there, and we're hoping we're going to partner with them moving forward. So I wanted to let you know that. Secondly, on the education, I couldn't agree with you more. My wife is a grade school teacher of now nigh on to 40 years, and she'd give you one answer: read, and they have to be read to at home.
Yeah, we have mentors, a program now, a mentor program, where we have mentors go into the schools and read what these kids are interested in. It's amazing. A light bulb just goes off. Mr. Rapp?
I'd like to say, too, that I'm a graduate of Fort Gordon. I spent 34 years in the Army, the last 3 in Army Cyber, and our CPT right now is on mission
Thank you for
here.
your service.
Absolutely. I would have to agree with reading. I think the other thing is teaching good cyber hygiene habits early. So teaching children safety and how to utilize technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, mentors that can provide some positive relatable examples, I think, are extremely important, and you know, instilling digital literacy at an early age, I think, is just going to help in the long run. Just as kind of an aside for the mentorship program, in one of the P-Tech schools that we sponsor in Baltimore, right, there are so many interested IBMers in helping mentor these kids that a lot of them have 2 mentors, which is great. I mean, because they can ask them questions and things like that. So I think that's essential.
That's important for the business community. I'm out of time. Mr. Rawls, you can comment on that on the next question. But I will tell you that there are 2 college dropouts that made a big difference in this world: Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And so with that, thank you for being here today.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm glad to be here this afternoon to engage in this timely discussion on how to address the growing need for a strong and diverse cybersecurity workforce. As the vice-ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee and as a member of its subcommittee on economic opportunity, I understand the importance of providing the resources needed to allow our talented and skilled veterans to pursue cybersecurity opportunities after their service. My first question is for Mr. Rawls. Mr. Rawls, you pointed to NOVA's efforts to support veterans in pursuit of a cybersecurity career. In particular, you mentioned a partnership with the United States Marines and Marine Corps University to provide surge educational opportunities. Can you share a bit more about the partnership surge educational opportunities?
Yes, sir. What SURGE refers to is essentially our, collectively with the Marine Corps University and the Marine Corps, is to be nimble in how we provide concentrated instruction at times when military members are available and can be scheduled to receive that. So for instance, short week classes or multi-week classes that are shorter than an average semester or even mini semester, same number of hours, but in a very concentrated way. So being able to do that, and then also being able to first recognize military occupational specialties. So there's about 10 MOSs within the Marines that will lead between 3 to 23 credit hours in terms of credit that can be received depending on what that previous technical background is, making our programs flexible through distance education and other opportunities, as I mentioned, and then making sure they ladder so that Marines can complete our programs. That's one of the reasons our state government General Assembly worked with us to, or led efforts to reduce tuition. So when Marines leave, maybe deployed or go to other places, they don't have to pay out-of-state tuition. A couple other things too. One thing that we're working towards, boot camps. I know boot camps have been mentioned. Programming skills are key to cyber. We created a special boot camp just for veterans. It's a different model. We're still struggling and working our way through it, but to make it free of charge to veterans, that's a concentrated, almost 50 to 60 hour a week boot camp. And so looking at different models, because military members, when they're in, they have periods of time for education. We got to make that work. And when they're out, they need to get into employment very quickly into certain roles.
I note that you have active duty service members in your program. Does tuition assistance from the Department of Defense help pay for their education?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that partly we want to make sure too, when students leave and they may be classified as out of state, that was an effort to.
Has there been thought about how you coordinate counsel these service members on using their tuition assistance in combination with their GI Bill, how they can strategize to use that to their best benefit? My thought is that many service members, once they leave the service, if they've already acquired a great deal of expertise and credit hours, they can try to bank their GI Bill and use it for a graduate degree. I mean, that kind of thinking, that kind of strategizing. How do you identify the Marines, for example, that can go to your program? They self-identify? Do you market to
You're talking about in terms of active duty Marines?
Yes.
Primarily through our relationships with Quantico. So, we have, on base, we have people stationed on base, but we also have such a strong relationship with Marine Corps University and others that this partnered. So those Marines who are there are aware of our programs, and we're working to scale those programs with Marine Corps University beyond just cyber and other opportunities as well.
This is really interesting to me because we have a huge problem with the TAPS program being considered inadequate. And as a teacher, former teacher, I've always thought that to be really, really, I don't know, I'm not accurate, but to be true to the GI Bill, the promise of the GI Bill, what we use to pull people into the service, that we should assess the students on day one, set educational goals for them while they're in the service, encourage them to use tuition assistance to bring their skills up, or in this case, they're actually acquiring a major set of skills. And then the separation wouldn't be so traumatic or aimless, or there's a much more seamless transition to civilian life.
Yes, and I would say too, the partnership I have to give a lot of credit to our Marine partners. The Marines are very focused now, the Commandant and others, in terms of making sure that all Marines have a credential, have a degree, and so I think community colleges and these partnerships are key in that regard.
Sir, my time is up. I want to explore, I hope we can get your information. I want to have our committee on the veterans side explore more about what you're doing. Thanks. I yield back, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the panel. Mr. Rapp, when you first talked about your son, that was really an interesting moment for me because I sat here thinking about the fact that the battery on my phone is about to die and I feel so vulnerable. And I thought about the vulnerability of us as individuals with autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, biotech. I started running through all of these things that I had not thought about years back that are now before us. And as a nation, as business people, as individuals, this conversation is vital. I have two perspectives to bring. One, I served as a state personnel director in the state of Delaware, and we had a shortage of IT professionals. And one of the things that we had to look at is what attracts them to the job and also how to retain them. And so one of my questions is really about, is there any research to suggest what would attract people to the field? That's the first question. And then the second is really around, because I met an NSA, a young guy who came from a great school, and it wasn't the things that I would think would attract somebody to the job. It was something as simple as parking. Like, there were things that, because NSA needs parking. But I'm just curious, is there any research on what attracts people to the job, and also the marketing aspect? Is there any marketing that's happening? Because some of these fields are things we never even heard about before. So a parent is not saying, go be a cyber technician. They're saying, go be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. Anybody, any advice on those?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we have to break down some barriers. When we look at the romanticized version of working in the Valley, it seems very, 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 very attractive until you get out there and you're sharing a 1,100 square foot apartment with 4 other people. So, we also have to we have to embrace change. And, as governments look towards attracting that type of talent, there's some hard work that has to be done. Simple things like the scholarship for service, expanding that to state and local governments, because we're as vulnerable from those aspects as we are from the federal government, because we all work together and our systems all interact. So we've got to get out of these these verticals that we put ourselves in. The other thing is we have to look at great example of a soldier who was trained by the United States Army, went to the CPT in Indiana, left the state of Indiana to go do this training, came back with more certifications than I can possibly remember, and then went back to the government and they told him that they couldn't hire him back in because he would come in at a much higher level, and there was a rule that he couldn't make more money coming back in, that much more money coming back in. When we look at GS levels and things like that and the qualifications for jobs, those things were written decades ago and they need to be updated. So if you want to attract people to it, you have to speak a common language and a more modern language. Those are just a few observations there. Security clearances, higher education produces a lot of degrees, and it's lucrative to attract out-of-state, out-of-country tuition. So we're training people and sending them back to our competition. And we in CLA like to work with the community colleges because they're more likely to have U.S. citizens. So when they go to get security clearances, if they can get one in a year or 18 months, then they have a better chance of doing that. Much of the work that's done in cybersecurity in the state of Indiana is defense-oriented.
I have less than a minute
I'm
left.
sorry.
It's not your fault, mine. But Dr. Cambone and Dr. Rawls, maybe afterwards, I was just curious about your relationships with the workforce development systems. To me, I was around for WIA and WIOA, and I'm just curious if the relationships have been good, strong, better, worse.
Our apprenticeship opportunity started with our workforce board. Our chair of our college is also chair of our regional workforce board, so we have a very unique synergy.
Excellent.
Yes, ma'am. It's very strong. We've got 2 agencies, actually, who spend a lot of time doing workforce development across the entire spectrum. So the answer is yes.
Gotcha. And then my last quick question, which we don't have time for, but I was just curious if background checks and security clearances limit the folks that are entering the field, and if that's a challenge, particularly with a lot of things that people are into these days, like marijuana.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I had some experience with this back in my earlier career, and the answer is twofold. In certain respects, it has gotten less, your life is less a prohibition to your being granted a clearance, provided that you are straightforward in your testimony, if you will, in the forms that you fill out. If you live abroad, it's a little more complicated, but that's gotten a little easier. The difficulty is we have a massive backlog, and getting the clearance is oftentimes the barrier to being able to do certain kinds of work. And so we really do need to go back and rethink why we classify things the way we do, and then how do we put the clearance process in place to match the kind of work that needs to be done. So not everything is top secret, so not everybody needs a top secret clearance. So can we start to vary these things over time? And that's a tough one, but one we got to tackle.
Thank you. My time is expired.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
And the ranking member and the collaborators on the House Committee on Education for a very important collaboration, if you will, on a very important issue. I want to take a moment of personal privilege to acknowledge Dr. Stephen Cambone for his representing a Texas institution, Texas A&M, and as well to thank him for hosting the Hurricane Harvey event in collaboration with the George H.W. Bush Library, and to historically host 5 of our living presidents. So it was a monumental and much-needed event for all of the people that are suffering, and it's well known in my community that we are still in dire straits and are certainly in need of restoration and resources to do so. I was speaking to some people in the power industry, and they were trying to explain the Achilles heels in Puerto Rico in particular, and certainly I think the same kind of Achilles heel would be present in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And one of the issues, of course, is the lack of power and the long journey of having that power back on. I connected to the extent of what we're trying to do here is our committee that is in collaboration is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure. We certainly need the talent that can relate to those aspects of our governmental responsibilities and private sector responsibilities, and we need the personnel to be able to do so. So I may have just 2 questions, and I'll frame it in that way. Puerto Rico needs not only people who know how to work with hardware, engineers, and those who work with the Army Corps of Engineers, but we need ideas. We need to understand how we can protect the infrastructure or the cyber infrastructure that also is a victim of Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma as well. So as you answer the question, I think I'd like to hear you talk about the pervasiveness, the wide breadth and depth of cyber and the need for human resources in that area to be creative in so many of the obstacles that we may face, whether it's man-made or, God forbid, man-made, we hope not, but natural disasters that we will face and seemingly are going to face for a long period of time. We have not yet been able to assess what the fires in California in terms of infrastructure, cyber, will do. The second part of my question is that I serve as a ranking member on the Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security Committee, and when we're really at our best in judiciary, we're working on ways to prevent crime, to intervene in that, and to find alternatives for those individuals whose lives are somewhat ruined for a good period of their life if they're not rehabilitated. And we find in these in incarcerated state and federal prisons very bright people. So I'd like you to comment on that broad span of how this idea of the workforce and building the workforce and finding people to be in the workforce, whether it's DACA young people or otherwise, is crucial to the future of this nation. And I commend for your reading H.R. 935, which is a bill that I introduced that I'm trying to hopefully draw the attention of the ranking and the chairperson of all of the committees involved here, Cybersecurity Education and the Workforce Enhancement Act, to prepare in particular minority students and professionals for the jobs of this century. It goes on to talk about recruiting, providing grants for training programs, supporting guest lecturer programs, and we're using Department of Homeland Security cyber personnel to go out and really get their hands around this issue. So if you would, all of the witnesses, Dr. Cambone, is it Cambone or Cambone? Pardon me?
Cambone.
Cambone, and Dr. Rapp, Mr. Rapp, Mr. Jarvis, and Mr. Rawls, if you could comment on those points,
Well,
broad
thank you.
points.
Thank you, ma'am. I will convey to the Chancellor your compliments. As you know, he has been assigned the responsibility by the governor to lead the recovery efforts in the state. And he's done that in coordination with industry, with the other universities, and brought to bear, because I see them every day, the 2 institutions I've made mention of, both TEAS and TEACS. So there's a ready-made force there that we were able to bring to bear. We need to be able to replicate that around the country.
Just each one go down and answer the question.
I believe that, you know, as we address cybersecurity and infrastructure, that we need to take a look at private partnerships, public-private partnerships like the Battery Innovation Center, working on stored energy and microgrids so that when we see a natural disaster that takes place, or we have a natural disaster or something that takes place, then the grid is not only protected but segmented and able to come up quicker. So my point to that is there's existing technology and partnerships that are working on those types of things out there right now that certainly can be leveraged. To your other point, I absolutely agree, and some of the discussions we've had in the Cyber Leadership Alliance is how do we reach people who are part of the have been indoctrinated in the criminal justice system, that have valuable skills that they can be re-educated and apply themselves to. And I think a lot of that can come from great programs that are interjected to our places where people are incarcerated.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add.
I would add, we've been batting around a number of statistics related to the already huge gap that we have in terms of demand, supply, in terms of workers, but that's primarily been traditional cybersecurity. When you're talking about infrastructure, I think it brings to mind, or something I indicated a little earlier, but I think we're going to see a great acceleration of one of the largest skill gaps, talent gaps, workforce gaps we have right now is in terms of the role of maintenance technicians. Already industries and facilities, buildings are already struggling in those regards, but I think what's happening with connection and networking devices and facilities, and where your refrigerator is connected, your HVAC system, your PLCs, technicians' roles, I think, are going to be even more important. And so that's why I think also programs like mission critical operations certifications that were started within community colleges in North Carolina, opportunities to really look at these areas of critical infrastructure, which will provide a lot of job opportunities for folks who wouldn't traditionally see themselves in the traditional IT cyber role. And to meet those needs, I think we're going to have the educational resources, but also the breadth to be able to open up the resources to as many talented people as we can possibly find. I think the demands are going to be huge and accelerating because of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Garrett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the members of the panel, and thanks to my colleague from Texas for going a little bit over, because that let me get my thoughts together. I appreciate it. It's great to have you all in front of us. I actually was out of the room speaking, ironically enough, with the commander of TRADOC, Training and Doctrine for the military, and specifically about cyber and the threat therein. And so while I am honored to serve on both the Education and Workforce Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, I'm going to come at it from a Homeland perspective here in my time. The paradigm that we face as a nation is changed in a manner more dramatic than any that I can think of in history as it relates to the threat that we face as a nation. And the reason I say that is throughout history, whether it were mounted cavalry or dreadnoughts or fighter aircraft or nuclear submarines, we could quantify a threat based on a number of platforms, instruments by which an entity might threaten another, and usually then assess the existential nature of the threat or the lack thereof. We can't anymore. And the reason, obviously, is that one individual with the proper training, located remotely, perhaps in their basement, and that might be in Tehran and it might be in Portland, can wreak havoc uncontemplatable, perhaps, in human history by virtue of the interconnectivity of everything. We've seen in the Baltic states as well as in the Ukraine, the impacts of real aggressive cyber attacks. And so as we discuss public-private partnerships to prepare our young people for opportunities moving forward, I think it's important to also understand the government role in this endeavor, because of the fact that the threat of the 21st century really will manifest itself, I think, at a keyboard and not in the cockpit of an aircraft or the driver's cupola of a main battle tank. So it's particularly, number one, Dr. Rawls, I think we might have bumped into one another when I was back in the Virginia General Assembly, so great to see you here, and thanks for the good work you do at NOVA. A little bit biased, even if you're from Texas A&M, y'all are awesome, but we have wonderful community colleges in Virginia, where we try to tailor the training that you all give to the employers in the area and the futures of the young people. but IBM, DEF CON, what DEF CON does is really the private version of what I think we need to do better as a nation, and that is sort of a constant perpetual threat and updating of black and white lists, et cetera. But the problem is this: when your pay scale is a government pay scale, and the marketplace drives talent based on the ability to receive a financial reward, then we can be assured that the great cyber minds might be working at Deutsche Bank or Honda International, that they might be working at IBM or at DEF CON, but it's hard to envision them in the wonderful Army green that I wore for 6 years, by virtue of the fact that $55,000 a year doesn't drive the best talent. So how do we engage young people, A, to enter this growth industry, and then B, how do we, understanding market forces, specifically the payment that you receive for being amongst the elite in your skill set, capitalize on the investment in training these young people to protect this country? That's a riddle that I haven't solved yet. One thing that we've done is tried to co-locate cyber units in the military near, technology hubs. Seattle, we might have a cyber unit. Northern Virginia, we have National Guard units that are cyber, so that we might have somebody who works for a wonderful corporation that does IT and then gets a pittance on 1 weekend a month to come do that. But I'd invite specifically Mr. Rapp and Mr. Jarvis to speak to how we integrate the educational opportunities to the national defense needs that I think we've been slow to identify, and certainly don't want to identify too late.
I didn't know if it was appropriate to raise my hand and say, pick me, but
Well, I already picked you.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was in another room watching you, this guy.
So I lived that story, and some of the recommendations we made early on to get cyber integrated into the military. First of all, the United States Army, the military need to look at direct commissions. So for skilled professionals, we do the same with doctors. We do it with lawyers. Why wouldn't we do it with cyber professionals? The second thing is we have increased physical fitness standards for special operations groups. Why would we expect cybersecurity professionals to have why do we not have a physical fitness test that takes into account the MOSs or the job skills that each one of those soldiers have? We've long since judged people across the board on a single standard, and that's just not the reality that we live in today. There's no shortage of patriotic cybersecurity people out there, but age limitations, the commitments of joining the military, those things all become barriers to entry for cybersecurity professionals. And the National Guard is a great way to leverage patriotic Americans that do things on the day and then can bring those skills on the weekends. So I'd say those are some ways that we can do it. I don't think there's a shortage of attracting people to those jobs. I think it's a barrier to entry.
So I'm over, but I would beg the chairman's indulgence. So essentially an MOS waiver program to recruit the best and brightest in specialized fields.
I absolutely think that we should. And I'll give you another personal story. My son was disqualified from military intelligence service because he was colorblind. So now he's studying cybersecurity and psychology on the civilian side, and he'll be hired back by the United States government as a contractor, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman.
I apologize to Mr. Jarvis, but I'd welcome, if you want to reach out to our office, I'd welcome to hear your thoughts.
And thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie, Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Davis, and Ranking Member Richmond for calling this very important joint subcommittee hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming in today. I really enjoyed your testimony. I think it's fair to say nowhere is the skills gap or the workforce skills gap more evident than in cybersecurity. A recent report by Forbes and the University of Pennsylvania estimates that there are 1.4 million unfilled jobs in this field alone. That's why workforce development organizations, community colleges, and CTE program administrators need to work together to strengthen our cybersecurity workforce pipeline. American safety and economic prosperity depend on it. I have a few questions. Dr. Rawls, I was very interested to learn that
you have successfully expanded your cybersecurity associate's degree program from 50 to 1,500 people in just four years. Could you explain the effect this has had on your school's financial standing?
Well, it explains where we're putting many resources. And what we have to do in an age of zero sum is, as resources become available, particularly instructional resources, but also facilities. We've just purchased a new facility in Manassas. We're renovating a facility in Alexandria. We have a new tech center in Reston. So certainly it's a prioritization of resources because that's where the workforce needs are, and because we're not growing overall, even though our cyber program's growing, that means it's shifting resources, and so that's a challenge. Obviously for us, tapping into the rich pool of adjuncts is important. I have to applaud the NSA for helping us with that. Last year we had 18 faculty members who were able to receive education in certified ethical hacking to gain the certification. They already had the skills, but they need the certification so they can teach people how to get the certification as part of the program. So those programs that support those efforts are key. Just yesterday, representatives of colleges around the country were meeting with NSA and brainstorming ideas, and one of the ideas was about a virtual job fair, really tapping into recent PhDs and others coming out of programs and trying to draw them into programs like ours. So I think there are programs out there, certainly NSF CyberWatch, NSA CAE programs that are helping colleges like ours, and particularly even not so much colleges like ours, but others that are just getting into the cybersecurity game that are important. But as I mentioned before, those efforts have to scale just as we're having to scale to go from the number of students we're providing.
Do you find the funding that you receive at NOVA at the federal, state, and local level sufficient to meet the demand in the classroom?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, that's...
How much does it need to go?
I'm not, well, I can't tell you. I mean, obviously, I should be able to tell you, but for instance, just think in terms of our cyber program. So we have 1,500 program-placed students, but we're an open door admissions. So we don't really say to students, you can't come into our program. It's just that they will run into challenges as we run into challenges in providing their needs. And so that's an ultimate challenge for us. But I'll just give you an example. This year I mentioned, our Perkins funding. We're the 14th largest college or university in the country. We have a $270 million annual budget. And our Perkins fundings that we get for our college this year is $417,000. It's, that's why we're putting all of it, down on just recruiting female students through IT, because it's, I truly believe this, that I think technical education is one of the biggest gaps between rhetoric and investment across multiple areas is technical education, and we have to get more serious about it.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I'm the Democratic lead, along with Republican Glenn Thompson, on the renewal of the Perkins Career Technical Education program that unanimously passed through the House. We're hoping that it passes the Senate. It does provide for more funding, and we'd ask you to urge your senators to take this up. The Cyber Core Scholarship for Service program at the federal level today only provides stipends to students at four-year colleges and universities. How can Congress expand current programs to ensure that community college students have access to these critical funds? Dr. Rawls, do you want to comment on that?
Well, there's I think it was introduced in the Senate, a bipartisan legislation, the 2017 Cyber Scholarship Act, which actually would expand those efforts to include community college students. So that's a very specific thing that's out there right now. We've been able to get some students into in the programs through our partnerships with like Marymount University and others who have reached with us. So there are some doors that you can go through articulation, but it needs to be expanded to include certainly community college students, and that particular legislation does that, or proposal does that.
Last question. I know I'm out of time, but I did want to ask this. Are there any other countries that do a good job of training their cybersecurity workforce, or adequately providing for a cybersecurity workforce in their countries? We can take answers from any of you.
I would say a leader in that area would be Israel. and that's through a close cooperation between the educational universities, the educational institutions, private industry, and the military. So they have less barriers between those three sectors, and they've very successfully been able to produce the workforce to bat about 35 times above their weight, second only to the United States in cybersecurity product exports.
Any others?
I wouldn't say that maybe some examples of people that are doing a good job, but I think we can look to other countries for examples of how they're trying to address their own cyber skills gap, because they do have them, whether it's in the UK where they're setting up a national college for cybersecurity in Bletchley Park, or if it's looking at Singapore where they're trying to take a look at various vocational models to help bolster their cybersecurity workforce. I think we can look to some examples in other countries to help augment what we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, and I thank all of the witnesses for your insightful and valuable testimony and answers today. I thank the members for some very thoughtful questions. It's possible that some members may have additional questions for our witnesses, and if so, we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will remain open for a period of 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.